Hey everyone, I hope you're all well. It's Jason here again. Look, I did have a number of people ask me to continue on with the JCA50 mod that I completed and featured in the last video. A number of people wanted the DIY guide, so I've done that, recorded that, step by step, kind of go through with detailed pictures of the amp. So I've got the schematic which I published last time, and with the instructions in this video, hopefully that's enough to enable you to complete this mod yourself if you're interested. It is a lot easier, I think, than the mods on the Origin 20, which I published previously. Again, like I did with the Origin, I will put the schematic in terms of a PDF document and the detailed pictures. I'll do a bill of materials as well. I haven't done that yet, but I will do it, and they will be available for download on the website, right? So check the description in the video here. You'll get the address to our website. You can go up there, download these documents, and get modding. So we'll go through a few tones as well, because I didn't actually go through the settings, I guess, on the amp in the first video. I just kind of got up and played it straight away. I'm actually on the Crunch channel here, which has also been modded, right? So I focused the mods on the Overdrive channel, but I did make some changes to the Crunch channel as well, and I think we're getting some pretty decent tones out of this Crunch channel now. So we've got the preamp on the Crunch channel here, basically at midday, right? The bass is about 11 AM, trebles at midday, trebles at 1 PM. I've got the master at about 10, and the presence is about 1 PM, and the depth is new depth, variable depth pot on the rear of the amp. It's up at about 9 AM, maybe 9:30, somewhere around there. So, kind of, pretty decent tones there. With the Crunch Overdrive back, and I'm going to bring the master up a little bit to compensate. The clean tones in there. I mean, they're a little bit of dirt on there, right? And let's bring the Crunch up now. So we started at midday, I've gone back, let's bring it up to, we're in about 3. I'll just bring the master back a little bit now, because we've obviously brought the preamp gain up. So you can get some kind of pretty driven crunch sounds out of the Crunch channel now. Yeah, so you play rhythm with those settings all day long. So over to the Overdrive channel, I've got the gain at midday, I've got the rest of the amp dialed in exactly the same as it was with the Crunch. So I haven't changed a single thing on here. So Overdrive straight up at midday. Now remember, in the video from last time, if you can recall, we have a 1 nanofarad bright cap on this Overdrive channel now. So that's a fair value, right? So that's like an old Plexi, like JCA50H, basically bright cap value. And if you've ever played at 800, again, you've really got to get that preamp up. Otherwise the bright cap's a bit overbearing. This circuit's a bit different. There's a lot more body in what I've done here. A lot more body in through the mid-range and the bottom end than you'll find in a JCM800. So the bright cap works pretty well here, and you don't need to get the preamp all the way up, or 3/4 up, to compensate for that bright cap. So I find at a kind of midday position, it's pretty good balance between the body of the amp and a bit of that bite. If you bring the overdrive up too much, you'll find, and I'll demonstrate it, right, it starts to get a bit too much bottom end, a bit too undefined and woolly in the bottom. So there is definitely an optimal setting here, and again, with the preamp gain too low, you'll find that bright cap it's a bit probably a bit overbearing and gets a bit too bright. So midday, probably the Goldilocks position here. And bringing the overdrive back, I might just bring the presence down a bit, because as I bring the overdrive back, it's going to get a bit brighter because of that bright cap. Go to single. So let's bring the overdrive right up. Now, I find that anything beyond maybe 2 p.m, it does start to get a bit too much bottom end, bit too woolly. But yeah, we'll bring it up and you can hear for yourself. Right, so I'm going to bring it all, maybe not all the way up, just back a bit. So I'm about 3:30, 4 p.m. there. So I find back at about there, it's about 2 p.m. is probably, if you're going for max gain, but you still want to retain a bit of tightness in the amp, pretty good balance for me. Goldilocks position's probably around midday, to be honest, but you can kind of get it up to about 2 p.m. there, I think, before that bottom ring really starts to take over. Alright, this is a Headfirst modded JCA50 head Jet City. Details about how to do the mod follow. Enjoy guys, cheers. So in terms of a DIY guide for the Jet City 50, as modded and featured in this clip and the one before it, I'm just going to go through a bunch of detailed up close photos, right? So you can kind of see how I actually wired the mods in. So you can follow this. I suggest you do it in reference to the schematic though that I've published. I know a lot of people say to me, you know, I have trouble reading schematics, but which is cool. I understand, right? But do just reference the values and the positions against the schematic, because you can see on these PCBs, right, that we're modding, the components are labelled by number, right? R for resistor, C for capacitor, V for valve. All right, so starting, I'm going to kind of go from one side of the board through it, and this is, you know, kind of moving from the left-hand side of the schematic across to the right. So the very first changes we've got here is in position C32 and R49. So I pulled C32 out of the PCB, and R49 has been pulled out as well, and I've replaced it with, this is a 2K7 carbon film 1 watt resistor, right, with a 0.68 microfarad electrolytic capacitor straight over the top of it. You do need to pay attention to the polarity. So obviously, you know, the minus and the plus, these electrolytic capacitors are actually, you know, have a plus side and a minus side, or a positive and a negative. So you can follow the pictures here. Alternatively, use your multimeter and just confirm which leg of the component you're putting into is grounded. And you can do that by putting onto an ohms function, resistance function. Put one end of the meter on the chassis, right, which is ground. Chassis is always ground, and the other end onto the leg or onto the pad. And if it measures 0 ohms or close to 0 ohms, you know you've got a ground pad there. Okay, so 2K7 with a 0.68. See how I've just kind of piggybacked one on the other? Too easy. You can actually put the electrolytic capacitor obviously into where C32 was. That's perfectly fine as well. I just caution, and you can see here, if you look closely, the very first component I pulled out, the solder pad came with it, right? So that is a problem. I was able to get around it, obviously, just by using the pads for R49, and I put the capacitor over the top. I mean, a lot of amp manufacturers do this technique anyway, right, with the electrolytic cap like that sitting on top of the resistor, so it's not a problem. Just a word of caution in terms of pulling out the existing components. The way I do it, ignoring that problem there, right, the way I do it successfully is I get a bit of new solder. So I put the soldering iron, let's say I'm pulling this one out, I put the soldering iron on here. I'll apply a new little bit of solder onto the pad. So you can see these resistors and so on in this amp from the factory are pretty clean. Not a lot of solder on there. It's actually quite hard. You can see on this capacitor here, it's quite hard to heat up the whole pad so you can pull the component leg out. But you can really help it along by applying your soldering iron on one side, get some fresh solder and put it on there. Your fresh solder will melt, and it'll melt through the pad, and it'll free up the whole component. Don't be afraid to leave it on there for 10, 20 seconds if you need to. You'll know, right? So get some little pliers and start to feel for some free play in the component. You'll start to feel it. You'll feel that it kind of comes free. Once it's free, then you can pull it out gently. Do not try and yank it out before the solder is melted all the way through, because these are double-sided boards, so there's a solder pad that's on the other side of the board as well. So the solder needs to melt and become liquid all the way through. So it does take a little bit of work to heat it up. If you try and yank it out before the whole pad is melted through, or the solder's melted through, you'll end up with what I did here. Right, so be warned. Okay. Now, moving on, this is R46 here. It is a 220k resistor. You leave that in place. This is a 120 picofarad mica cap, which I've just stuck over the top. This is a plate snubber. I mentioned these on the last video for the JCA50 I did, where I kind of introduced the modded tones. This is keeping the top end treble under control, right? So the very high end frequencies get filtered away from your audio signal by putting these high frequency filters, like a low pass filter, right? But at a very high frequency, just keeps the as I said, keeps the harshness out of the amp. I mentioned that on the last video. Okay, so moving on. R45 is the cathode resistor for the second gain stage for the crunch channel. This is a 2.2K resistor. I've left it in place, right? I could have pulled it out and put a 2K7 in there, but look, 2.2 is okay for where I was going with this. And to give this gain stage a bit more zing, I put a 0.68 microfarad on here as well. Same value as this one. Do note though, right, it's around the other way around. So just check your grounds, make sure that you're doing this the right way around. The negatives is on the far side here. Negative is ground, if you didn't know that. Right, moving on. Okay, I'm now moving to C30. So C30 is a 22 nanofarad cap in the stock amp. Looks like this big blue one here. This is C30 here. I pulled that out. This is a 2.2 nanofarad or 2N2 capacitor. It's a film capacitor. I've just got a whole bunch of these that I use, when I'm modding amps. Any kind of film capacitor in here will kind of do the job, right? But these are used. This kind of capacitor is used pretty extensively in Marshall style amps. They sound great. There's no problem there. Coming along here, R42 is bypassed, right? So again, this is for the crunch channel, and this is a little filter network. I think this is I think in the stock amp is a 2 meg 2. I'll have to check that, but this resistor that's in here, and this capacitor is filtering out bottom end. It's a high pass filter network, and I found with the crunch channel, because I've lowered this value here, I've knocked out a bit of bottom end already. So to bring some bottom end back, or to actual, no more bottom end was filtered out, I just bypass this simply by putting this is an offcut off a resistor. You just reuse it, wire that in there, solder that in there. The capacitor's no longer even not even being used, because your signal will just go straight across that bypass link, and that's your normal channel done. Okay, moving on. We are looking at R39 here. So R39 is the plate resistor for V2, the first gain stage on V2. So this is, I think, 100K in the stock amp. Replace this with a 220K. Okay, and again, similar to R46, where we put the mica cap across it to filter out very high frequencies, we're doing the same thing here. This is a 500 picofarad mica capacitor. In the schematic, it says 470. You can use for either, right? 470 and 500 are close enough for what we're doing with this amp. No problem. Here we've got R38. R38 is the cathode resistor for the same gain stage, the same triode. We've replaced this with a 10K, right? So this resistor comes out and you put your 10K. Again, this is a carbon film 1 watt resistor. Put your 10K resistor in there, and now you've set up your 10K second gain stage for the Overdrive channel. Okay, moving along here. C21 I replaced, right? So in the stock amp, this is a 470 picofarad capacitor. It looks like one of these little ones, little brown ones. I've replaced this with a 1 nanofarad ceramic capacitor, right? This is a bright cap for the gain pot on the Overdrive, and in this circuit, or the circuit that we're heading towards here, this works really well. I find the 1 nanofarad bright cap here pretty much spot on for this circuit. Okay, This is a 220k and the 500 picofarad we're looking at before, and this is the 10k that we're looking at before. While we've got this picture up, I'll show a few other changes, right? So R35, which is in the schematic, which is, the schematic is off the service manual off the internet, right? R35 is not actually labelled. It's got an R. It's got an R question mark on there, and R35. I think there was a different value in there. So what you want, R35 and R36, you want both as 470k, which is per the schematic. So here's R35 and here's R36. This is 470. Okay, so 5-band resistor, which is why it's got the orange. 4-band resistor uses the yellow. 4, 7, and then the multiplier, that's 470k. This is 470k. That sets up your voltage divider that then heads into the V2B, which is now the third gain stage for the Overdrive Channel. Okay, so this is C22 here. So this is another one of these 500 picofarad mica caps. It's exactly the same as this one. And in the stock amp, there is one of these plate snubbers in place. I think it's only 120 picofarad from memory. You have to forgive me, I don't have the stock schematic in front of me. I'm just referencing the modded one. So that one comes out and you put a 500 in there or a 470 picofarad, right? C22, that just goes in there nicely. And so far, all we've had to do really is just kind of replace, existing components. And the only trickery, if you call it that, is, putting a couple of these mica caps in parallel over the top of new resistors. So pretty straightforward. This is just another view on the same thing, right? So here's our two 470s, R35 and R36, and our 500 picofarad or 470 per the schematic. Okay, now we've got a few more tricky things going on here. This is a little bit more, you got to sort of improvise here a little bit to make the changes to the stock, working obviously within the stock PCB. This is C20, obviously, as you can see here. Again, in the stock amp, this is just one of these blue, looks like this guy here, a 22 nanofarad coupling capacitor. So, or maybe it's a 20, but same. Well, not the same, but close enough. 22. It's one of these blue ones anyway, guys. So what we're doing here is, and I mentioned this in the last video, I reduced the value to 4.7 nanofarad. And the reason I did that, this is it here, this is a 4.7 nanofarad film capacitor. The reason I did it was to knock some more bottom end out of the preamp. There's too much bass, and I just had to kind of reduce the value of the cap here, which is fine. It's a very common technique. This is a 220k resistor. You can use, the carbon films that I have been using. I can see one up here. You can use one of those, it's fine. These are metal oxide 1 watt resistors that I do use in a lot of my Wizard style builds. So they have the same, they have the same power rating, but they're just a bit smaller. And so for some of these little tricky, kind of more tricky maneuvers, if you like, I just reach for a couple of those to, make the job a little bit easier. Look, one of these 1 watt carbon films in here will be fine, right? So just get a 220k. The reason we're doing this is because we want to set this up as, if you look at the schematic, we're setting up a voltage divider that attenuates the signal before it hits the V3. All right. So without that 220k there, the signal's a bit too hot as it hits that triode, and you get a bit of blocking distortion. It sounds a bit ugly. This kind of helps us keep it under control. So pull C20 out, both legs, put your new cap in there, just one side, put your resistor in the other side, and then join them together with a bit of solder, and you'll be sweet. R32 is the 39k resistor. This is in the stock amp, it's the 39k Soldano cold clipper, which I mentioned in the last video. And if you do any reading around the Soldano, the slow 100, and what's unique about that circuit, the 39k cold clipper cathode on this gain stage, is kind of one of the unique things there. As I mentioned in the previous video, though, I've moved this amp a little bit away from the kind of Soldano, lineage, and more to modded Marshall, right? Which is where we're getting our kind of 10k cold clipper cathodes. So R38 has been set up with a 10k. There it is up there. I can see it. There's R38. So this is 10k cathode on V2A, and V2B we're also doing 10k, but we've got a few other extra tricks here. So again, I'm using these little metal oxide 1 watt resistors. It's perfectly fine to use these 1 watt cathode films. If you've got those, just go for it, right? As I said, I've got a whole stock of these, so I just use them because these little multiple pieces put together, that I just find that a little bit easier to work with. This is a 10k, right? It's going from one side of R32 to the other, just per the schematic. And then in parallel with it, this is a 2k7. So you see these join together and go into the pad, right? 2k7 join to a 330 nanofarad capacitor. And the other end of this cap joins on to the other end of this 10k resistor here. Right? So at this end of R32, we've got the 10k and one leg of the cap. At the other end, we've got the other end of the 10k, one end of the 2k7 or 2.7k resistor, and then the resistor and the cap just joined together there. If you wire it like that, you've replicated what the schematic says. And that sets up the amount of gain that you're going to get from the third gain stage of the Overdrive channel, and that's giving you that drive and tone. This is what we're looking at now, is into the setup for the tone stack, right? So setting up the treble, bass, and middle pots and controls. So R24. I think it's 39k in the stock amp. I pulled that out and replaced it with a 33k. It's more classic Marshall setup here. 33k resistor. It's often called the slope resistor, if you've ever read about that or you're familiar with it. And then C14, which is the coupling cap for the treble pot. This is a 220 picofarad. Again, it's a mica cap. So, similar type of capacitor that's used on the plates numbers that we were talking about earlier. It's the same thing from a different view, right? So C14 comes out, put your 220 in there. If you don't have a 220, you can use a 250 in here. 250 picofarad will be perfectly fine. There's my 33k slope resistor. Okay, so that's like, in terms of PCB changes, guys, that is it. So it's a lot simpler than the Origin mod, where we're actually, changing the signal path and rewiring stuff. We're on to the depth circuit now. So what I'm looking at now is the back of the amp. This is the rear of the chassis. These are the speaker outs. All right, so these are the 4 ohm speaker outputs. And I've drilled through this metal chassis here. You have to drill through it. This is an 8mm drill bit. And I've got a 1 meg linear alpha pot mounted in here. And so what I'm doing, this red wire here is part of the stock amp. Before I modded it, it connected to where this white wire is. It connected onto here. This is a negative feedback line, right? So you tap it off the speaker. This is a 4 ohm tap coming from the output transformer, feeding the speaker jacks here, and this red wire connected directly to that and went straight across. I'll zoom out and you can see more high level picture of what's going on here. So what you're going to do is you're going to put your pot in here. You're going to run a wire from the tip. All right, this is the jack tip, not the ground. This is the ground down here. This is the jack tip here, and it connects to that lug. We're going to run it from there across to the pot. Those two lugs are connected. All right, so this capacity here, which is a 10 nanofarad cap, this leg of the capacitor goes through the middle lug and then onto that lug, and then soldered it all together. Right, so that's joined up. 10 nanofarad cap there, and then the negative feedback line now connects to this side of the pot. And if I zoom out, you can see it here, right? So this is a negative feedback coming back into the PCB here. This red wire is part of the stock amp. And as I just mentioned, it connects to here when you pull this chassis out, right? You're going to unsolder it from there, put your pot in, connect it there as described. And then what you'll have on the rear of the amp is this guy here, which is now a variable depth control, and you can put a nice little knob, a nice little knob on the onto the pot. And here is the whole thing from the top. Right, so you can see we talked through these changes. We started here, worked all the way through. So there's a bunch of changes through here, right? There's not that many, as I said. The most complicated thing you probably have to do is this little setup here, which is not really that difficult to do. Got your depth control on the rear. Yeah, and guys, that is it. So happy modding, and I hope you enjoy the amp. Cheers.